Let me be direct with you from the outset because what I am about to describe is unprecedented in modern naval history and represents a crisis that most Americans have absolutely no idea is happening right now. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced and expensive aircraft carrier ever built, a vessel that cost $13 billion and represents the pinnacle of American naval power, is currently operating in the Persian Gulf under conditions that multiple senior naval officers have privately described as tactically untenable and strategically indefensible. I am looking at a tactical assessment that was circulated among US Navy Strike Group commanders 72 hours ago. What it shows is not a theoretical scenario. What it shows is a real-time operational picture in which the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group is operating within range of Iranian anti-ship ballistic missiles, Iranian diesel-electric submarines, Iranian fast attack craft, Iranian shore-based cruise missiles, and Iranian naval mines, all while positioned in waters too shallow for effective defensive maneuvering. And the assessment concludes that if Iran chooses to engage, the Carrier Strike Group would face, quote, simultaneous threats from multiple vectors for which no existing defensive doctrine provides adequate response. In the next 23 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly how the Ford ended up in this position, what Iran's warning actually said, and why it changes the strategic calculus, what options the US Navy has, and why none of them are good, and why this situation represents the most serious challenge to American carrier operations since World War II. This is based on confirmed reporting from the Wall Street Journal, Defense News, US Naval Institute, and statements from serving and retired naval officers. Subscribe now because what we are covering is the potential end of carrier-based power projection as the foundation of American military strategy. Let's start with where the USS Gerald R. Ford actually is, and why that location creates the tactical nightmare that has Navy planners losing sleep. The Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, which includes the carrier itself, 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, 1 Ticonderoga-class cruiser, and 1 nuclear attack submarine, is currently positioned in the northern Persian Gulf approximately 85 nautical miles from the Iranian coast. According to automatic identification system data and satellite imagery verified by the Naval Institute, the carrier has been operating in this area since April 14, 2026. The Persian Gulf at this location has an average depth of 35 meters. To put that in perspective, the Gerald R. Ford displaces approximately 100,000 tons and has a draft of 12 meters, meaning there is only 23 meters of water beneath the keel. That is not a lot of room for maneuvering, especially for a vessel that measures 337 meters in length and requires significant space to change course at speed. But depth is only part of the problem. The Persian Gulf is, in naval terms, extremely confined waters. The distance from the Iranian coast to the Arabian coast is approximately 200 nautical miles at the widest point and narrows to less than 100 nautical miles in the northern Gulf where the Ford is operating. That means the carrier is always within range of Iranian shore-based weapons, always visible to Iranian radar and surveillance, and always vulnerable to attacks that can come from the coast, from the surface, from below the surface, and from the air simultaneously. Admiral James Foggo, former commander of US Naval Forces Europe and Africa, stated in an interview with Defense News on April 21st that operating a carrier strike group in the northern Persian Gulf is, quote, the naval equivalent of parking your most valuable asset in a shooting gallery where the adversary chooses when to start shooting and you have limited room to maneuver when they do. He continued, we train for open ocean operations where carriers can maneuver at 30 knots and maintain hundreds of miles of standoff from threats. None of those advantages exist in the Persian Gulf, so why is the Ford there at all? According to the Wall Street Journal, citing Pentagon officials, the carrier was positioned in the northern Gulf as a deliberate show of force intended to deter Iranian military action and demonstrate American resolve following the Strait of Hormuz closure. The assumption was that the presence of the most advanced carrier in the US fleet would make Iran recalculate the costs of confrontation. That assumption was catastrophically wrong. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now let's talk about what Iran actually said and did in response to the carrier deployment, because this is where deterrence failed and the crisis became acute. Announcement number 1. Iran issued a public warning on April 20th stating that any aircraft launched from the Gerald R. Ford that enter Iranian airspace will be considered an act of war and will be met with immediate military response, and then demonstrated the capability to make good on that threat by locking fire control radar onto carrier aircraft during routine patrol operations. The warning was delivered through multiple channels simultaneously. The Iranian Foreign Ministry issued a formal statement. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps released a video showing Iranian air defense systems tracking US aircraft, and Iranian state television broadcast a detailed explanation of the weapon systems Iran has positioned to target the carrier strike group. But the warning itself was less important than what happened next. According to reporting by the US Naval Institute, and confirmed by multiple defense officials speaking on background, on April 21st, two FA-18 Super Hornets launched from the Gerald R. Ford on a routine combat air patrol mission, while operating in international airspace approximately 40 nautical miles from the Iranian coast. Both aircraft received warnings that they had been illuminated by fire control radar from Iranian S-300 air defense systems. Fire control radar is not the same as search radar. Search radar is used to detect and track aircraft. Fire control radar is used to guide missiles to those aircraft. When fire control radar illuminates your aircraft, it means someone has a missile locked onto you and could fire at any moment. The pilots did exactly what they were trained to do. They broke off their patrol, activated electronic countermeasures, and returned to the carrier. Commander Rachel Weber, a former FA-18 pilot who flew combat missions over Iraq and Syria, explained in an interview with Task and Purpose what that experience is like. She stated, quote, "When your radar warning receiver tells you that you are being painted by fire control radar, your entire body floods with adrenaline. You know that someone has decided you are a target, and the only thing preventing them from firing is a political decision that could change in a second. It is the most psychologically intense moment in combat aviation. Now multiply that experience across every patrol flight launched from the Ford." According to Defense News, carrier air operations have been significantly reduced since the April 21st incident. Instead of launching 60 to 80 sorties per day, which is standard for a carrier on station, the Ford is now launching fewer than 20 sorties per day, and most of those are defensive patrols that stay well away from Iranian airspace. Think carefully about what this represents. An aircraft carrier exists to project air power. If the carrier cannot launch aircraft into the operational area, because doing so exposes pilots to unacceptable risk, the carrier is not projecting power. It is sitting offshore absorbing costs and resources, while accomplishing nothing strategically. Received. That is announcement number 1. Now let me give you announcement number 2, and this is the part that explains why the situation is even more dangerous than it appears from the fire control radar incidents alone. Announcement number 2. Iran has deployed at least 8 Ghadur-class submarines into the Persian Gulf in the past 10 days, and US Navy officials have acknowledged publicly that they have lost track of multiple Iranian submarines and do not know their current locations. This creates a scenario where the carrier is potentially surrounded by threats it cannot see and cannot effectively counter. The Ghadur-class submarine is specifically designed for Persian Gulf operations. It is small, only 29 meters long, displaces approximately 120 tons, and is powered by diesel-electric engines that allow it to sit silently on the seabed for extended periods. According to the US Office of Naval Intelligence Assessment from 2024, the Ghadur is, quote, optimized for ambush attacks in shallow, confined waters, and is extremely difficult to detect using conventional anti-submarine warfare methods. Iran operates between 14 and 19 Ghadur-class submarines, according to various intelligence estimates. If 8 are currently deployed in the Persian Gulf, that represents more than half of Iran's submarine fleet concentrated in the area where the Ford is operating. And here is the critical part. According to testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee by Vice Admiral Scott Conn, commander of U.S. submarine forces, on April 22nd, the U.S. Navy has, quote, low confidence in our ability to track quiet diesel-electric submarines in the acoustic environment of the Persian Gulf. The Admiral was asked directly by Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas whether the Navy knows where all Iranian submarines currently are. His answer on the record was, quote, no, Senator, we do not have continuous track on all Iranian submarines. The acoustic conditions, the heavy commercial traffic, and the shallow water create an environment where submarines can evade detection if they operate with discipline. Let me translate what that means in plain language. The United States does not know where Iranian submarines are. Those submarines could be positioned beneath the Ford's defensive perimeter right now, and the weapons those submarines carry, torpedoes and possibly mines, could sink or severely damage a carrier with a single successful attack. The Ford has anti-submarine warfare capabilities. It has helicopters equipped with sonar, it has escort vessels with towed array sonar, and it has submarine-launched torpedoes for defense. But all of those capabilities are designed for deep-water operations, where submarines have to maneuver actively and create noise that can be detected in 35 meters of water with heavy shipping traffic creating constant background noise. Those systems are far less effective. Captain Jerry Hendricks, a former Navy captain and now analyst at the Telemus Group, stated in an interview with Breaking Defense on April 23rd that the Ford Strike Group is operating in, quote, a submarine commander's dream environment. Shallow water, confined space, predictable target location, and a surface group that cannot sprint away at 30 knots because there is nowhere to sprint to. If I were commanding one of those Ghadr submarines, I would be positioned directly beneath the carrier strike group right now, waiting for the order to fire. Stay with me because this is where we're way in. The implications become impossible to ignore, and where you start to understand why senior naval officers are privately describing this situation as a strategic catastrophe. The Gerald R. Ford is not in the Persian Gulf on a training exercise. It is there because American strategic planning assumes that carrier presence deters adversaries and reassures allies. But what happens when carrier presence does neither? What happens when the adversary is not deterred, and allies are not reassured, and the carrier itself becomes a vulnerability rather than an asset? Announcement number 3. The Ford's presence in the Persian Gulf has not deterred Iran, has not prevented the Strait of Hormuz closure, and has not convinced regional allies to support US policy, meaning the carrier is absorbing enormous costs and risks while achieving zero strategic objectives. Let's look at what the Ford was supposed to accomplish. First, deter Iran from closing the Strait of Hormuz. Iran closed the strait anyway. Second, provide a platform for airstrikes if diplomacy fails. As we have discussed, air operations are severely constrained by Iranian air defenses. Third, reassure regional allies that American security guarantees remain credible. According to the Wall Street Journal, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have both told American officials privately that they view the Ford's presence as, quote, more provocation than protection, and have declined to provide logistical support for carrier operations. So what is the carrier actually doing? It is consuming approximately $4 or $5 million per day in operating costs. It is tying down 5,000 sailors and aircrew who could be deployed elsewhere. It is absorbing scarce anti-submarine warfare assets that are needed in other theaters, and it is creating a high-value target that Iran can threaten at minimal cost. According to a cost-benefit analysis published by the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, Iran is spending approximately $2 million per day to maintain the submarine deployments, air defense activation, and fast attack craft patrols that currently threaten the Ford. The United States is spending $4 billion. Iran is achieving its strategic objectives. The United States is not, but the costs go beyond money. According to multiple reports from military news outlets, morale among the Ford's crew is declining. Sailors understand the tactical situation. They know they are operating in an environment where the ship is vulnerable. They know that the defensive systems they trained on are less effective in these waters, and they know that the mission they are supposed to be accomplishing is not being accomplished. A senior chief petty officer aboard the Ford, speaking anonymously to Navy Times, stated, quote, "We came here to project power and deter aggression. Instead, we are sitting ducks in a shooting gallery, waiting to see if Iran decides to start shooting. Everyone knows it. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone knows it. If you are an American taxpayer, this situation should concern you deeply. The Gerald R. Ford cost $13 billion to build. The Carrier Air Wing costs approximately $6 billion. The escort vessels represent another $8 billion in combined procurement costs. That is $27 billion of military hardware currently positioned in an environment where it is vulnerable to attack from weapon systems that cost a tiny fraction of that amount. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. In 1941, the British Royal Navy deployed the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse to the Pacific to deter Japanese aggression and demonstrate British commitment to defending colonial holdings. These were among the most powerful warships in the world. The assumption was that their presence would make Japan recalculate the costs of southern expansion. On December 10, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked both vessels off the coast of Malaya. The Prince of Wales and Repulse had no air cover because the carrier that was supposed to accompany them had run aground. Within 2 hours, both ships were sunk. 840 sailors died, and the loss demonstrated to the world that the era of the battleship as the dominant naval platform was over. Aircraft, submarines, and missiles had made the battleship obsolete regardless of how expensive or impressive it was. The United States is operating under the same assumption the British Royal Navy made in 1941. The assumption is that bigger, more expensive, more technologically advanced platforms automatically provide strategic advantage. But if those platforms cannot operate safely in the environment where they are needed, if they cannot accomplish the missions they were designed for, and if they become targets rather than weapons, then their size and cost become liabilities, not assets. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. The United States withdraws the Ford from the Persian Gulf, repositions it to the Gulf of Oman or the Arabian Sea, where it has better maneuver room, and accepts that carriers cannot operate effectively in confined waters against adversaries with modern anti-access weapons. This is strategically honest but politically humiliating, especially after the deployment was announced as a show of strength. Likelihood: 40% within the next 2 weeks if the situation does not change. Path 2. The Ford remains on station, continues constrained operations, and the situation continues in tense stalemate. Iran does not attack because doing so would trigger a war it does not want. The United States does not withdraw because doing so would be perceived as backing down. Neither side achieves objectives. Costs continue to mount, and the risk of miscalculation increases daily. Likelihood: 45%. Path 3. Iran miscalculates, or a rogue commander acts without authorization and launches an attack on the Ford or its escorts. Alternatively, the United States launches a preemptive strike to reduce threats and Iran retaliates. The carrier is damaged or sunk. American casualties number in the hundreds or thousands. The United States is forced to respond militarily to avoid catastrophic loss of credibility. The conflict spirals into exactly the war nobody wanted. Likelihood: 15%, but rising every day the situation remains unresolved. I think we are on path 2, drifting toward path 1. The Pentagon knows the current posture is unsustainable. Senior officers know it, but the political costs of withdrawing the carrier after deploying it as a symbol of American resolve are enormous. So the carrier stays, the costs accumulate, and the vulnerability persists until either a face-saving diplomatic resolution emerges or an incident forces a decision. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if the most advanced carrier in the US fleet cannot operate effectively in the Persian Gulf, what does that say about the future of carrier-based power projection? Second, at what point does the cost and risk of maintaining naval presence in contested waters exceed the strategic value of that presence? And third, if Iran can neutralize American carriers using submarines and missiles that cost a fraction of carrier procurement costs, how should the United States restructure its naval strategy for future conflicts? Tell me in the comments what you think the Navy should do. Tell me if you think the Ford should withdraw, or if maintaining presence despite the risks is strategically necessary. We will keep tracking every development around the Gerald R. Ford in the Persian Gulf and at the Pentagon as military planners grapple with a situation that has no good options. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who wants to understand why American military power is being challenged in ways that were unthinkable a decade ago and what it means for global security. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.